Thank you. Right. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you today about building blocks without writing JavaScript, something which I've been experiencing over the last 18 months, as I'm sure a lot of people in the audience are building blocks. So let's get straight into it. I'll tell you a bit more about me at the end. I'm sure you want to know about this talk a lot more. Hopefully this clicker's going to work. There we go. So, now, I put this slide in because I didn't know who the audience was going to be, but obviously looking at all the talks this weekend and seeing what people have been saying, I think we all probably know what blocks are. So, but I will talk about them just briefly. So, what do we mean when we talk about building blocks with WordPress? So obviously, what is a block? If you're new to WordPress, you might not have heard of blocks. You might not understand how the editing experience has changed over the course of the last, 6-8 months. So if you've have your head in the sand, then about 18 months ago or 2 years ago, we started this project of building a new editor for WordPress. It was, I don't know if code named is the right word, but it was called Gutenberg. And it was to enable editors and content editors to build up pages of content with a block-based layout. And basically, each block is like a separate type of content. So think about image blocks, paragraph blocks, list blocks, video blocks, any other blocks that you can think of, maps, all sorts of things. And each bit is a separate piece of content that you can then order around, you can change the order of, etc. And it was a big change in WordPress, a big change for users, big change for developers, everybody involved with the project. And it meant that the editing screen completely changed. So this is the new editing screen in WordPress. This is the block editor. And it wasn't just the editor as we know it, so that WYSIWYG box that changed. The whole screen just completely changed. It has some common things on. You can still see categories and tags and featured images, etc. But it was a big change for everybody, whether you're editing content or whether you were developing for writing stuff and editing this screen. Just for context, again, those that may have not used WordPress for a long time, that's what the old editing screen looks like. So we've kind of got this just one area for users to add content, whereas in this bit, we've got lots of areas and lots of blocks get added to this right left-hand side. It's a bit more complex, but probably gives you a bit more control and a bit more options, if you like. So the crux of this talk is about building blocks as a developer. So how are blocks, core blocks, actually developed in WordPress? So when the team who was writing Gutenberg went about creating this new editing experience, how did they actually do it? Well, I don't actually know all of it because it's not my speciality, and that's part of the point of this talk. But there was a big shift, and I know this, from using PHP to using JavaScript. So most of what you see on the editing screen in today is not made or written with the traditional PHP code that certainly I was familiar with, and I'm sure lots of people in this room was most familiar with. So that's why there's a little tiny PHP and a huge JS, because most of it's JavaScript. And I don't really know JavaScript. I know a bit of jQuery to do a bit of this and a bit of that, but I don't really know JavaScript at all, well as such. So it's really heavily reliant on using JavaScript. And in particular, it uses a framework known as React, something again, which I don't really understand. I believe that it is a library for creating user interfaces, which essentially is what the editing screen sort of is. And it uses this quite heavily to do all the fancy stuff on that screen, that editing screen. Now, I am told that you don't need to know React to build blocks with JavaScript, but it would certainly help. So if you've got some knowledge of it and you can understand how it works, I think it will certainly help you build blocks in the way in which Core builds its blocks. But I don't think it's essential. It also uses lots of other cool stuff that I don't know about to actually compile all the JavaScript and to do all sorts of fancy things that I don't understand. One of them is like Webpack, and the point of this slide is that with PHP, you kind of just start writing PHP, then like save it and refresh the page and see what happens. You can't really do that, from my knowledge, with this sort of stuff. It requires a bit of getting started and getting everything set up in the right place before you can actually start doing this. So I started having a look at the Gutenberg repo when it first came out, and I just wanted to have a go at creating a block, and it was quite tricky. It was really difficult to actually get started, and 20 minutes in you just give up and then think I'll do it next week or whatever. So I find that really difficult to use, but obviously it gives us lots more options when we're building it in that way, but it's a big barrier, I think, to learning how to do these things. So all that left me thinking and looking a bit like that. I was scared, worried, angry, annoyed because I couldn't obviously do the things that I used to do in WordPress with the new editor. I was a PHP developer, and you know, I was, as I said, worried about it. How am I going to build the sorts of websites that I build for my clients when I can't do all this stuff? So it left us, a lot of people I think in the same boat as well. I don't know all this JavaScript, I don't know all this stuff, and I was in a bit of a panic and started to worry a bit. However, there is good news. So, now like most people, or maybe that's the wrong word, like a lot of people, I used a brilliant plugin called Advanced Custom Fields. I'm sure that lots of in the room use it to create the sort of editing experiences for our clients. I think David mentioned it in the first talk this weekend that they did sort of similar thing, and others have already mentioned it. If you don't know what Advanced Custom Fields is, it is a plugin that allows developers to easily customize the edit screens in WordPress. Whether that's editing a post, whether it's editing a user, whether it's editing a category, and so on, it allows developers to relatively easily edit those screens and make them more customized and more appropriate to the clients that you're building those sites for. So if you think about it, the old editor in WordPress had that one edit box, that was it. Well, this plugin allows us to put other edit boxes on the screen nice and easily. So we can make that easy for people to edit those pages. Now, we also use this plugin to create more block-based layouts, and I think David again spoke to this on the first talk of the morning about creating sort of what he called flexible content. I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So with the editor change, obviously, Advanced Custom Fields needed to change as well because the way they were doing things wasn't particularly going to be optimized for the new editor. And I think they've done a really good job. They've done a remarkable job about keeping this plugin up to date and keeping it working. Working both in the way that people might be using it now, with the sort of the current setup, and also bringing on new stuff to work with the editor, which we'll come on to in a little bit. So this is how we were building sites. Now, I wanted to just give you a quick recap for those that already use it, and maybe a quick intro for those that don't, about how you go about using this particular plugin to build fields. So this is one of the screens in WordPress in the Advanced Custom Fields, and basically what happens is you create a field group and then you put fields into that group. So let's imagine that we're creating a testimonial, so the testimonial will be the field group, and then inside that there might be a quote, there might be a person's name, and there might be a link to a website. So we put fields into that group for that particular thing, and then the client just sees this group of fields on the edit page, and they can just type in the answers, basically the different bits, and press save. And you can see at the bottom here is where you get the opportunity to tell Advanced Custom Fields where your fields are going to display. So in this case, if the post type is equal to post, so these are going to show on a post edit screen. That could be post type equals page, it could be post type equals my current custom post type, it could be if the user equals specific user, it could be if the taxonomy equals this taxonomy, it could be there's all sorts of different rules about where the location is, but that's how you tell Advanced Custom Fields, I've got these fields, I want to put them in this particular place for the client to be able to edit them. So I think it's important we understand how that works, particularly for those who haven't used ACF, Advanced Custom Fields, before. So, about a week ago, I think it was a week ago, and this was a long time in the making, a new version of Advanced Custom Fields was released. It was version 5.8, which is the very latest one. Now, this was in beta for a long time and release candidate as well, going back probably about 3 or 4 months at least, maybe even further than that. And what this update does is it allows advanced custom fields users to create what we might call a native blocks in Gutenberg in a very similar way to what they've created blocks, what they've created fields and field groups in the past. So as a developer, there is not very much change to the way in which you need to work to be able to create Gutenberg blocks without writing any JavaScript at all and having to worry about React and all that sort of stuff. And it introduced, amongst other things, there's lots of other updates to ACF version 5.8, but the major one for me was this function called ACF register block type. It used to be called ACF register block, and then when it got released, it had the word type on there, and just to stick with the current sort of the way core does it as well. And as you can see, that allows you to, as a developer, using PHP, to register blocks that can be used in the block editor in WordPress, which was Gutenberg, which I was really impressed with. And I was like, yay, I can do it. I don't have to use JavaScript. So it works very similar to how it used to work. So again, I would come into this particular screen, I'd create a field group. This has got call to actions as its name. And then I would add some fields to my field group. So let's imagine it's the testimonial example. We might, again, add the same fields for a quote and maybe a little picture of the person and the name and etc. and a link. And then that's great. But then what you need to do is you need to register your block. So I'm going to show you how you do this when it clicks. There we go. So this is the bit of PHP code that you need to write to register a block. Now, I fully suspect that in future versions of Advanced Custom Fields, you won't need to write this PHP code. I would suspect they will have this in sort of the GUI interface, if that's what you use, to be able to just register a block as well. Okay. So this is a testimonial block. So we're using this block, a register block type function. I'm going to have to look at the screen because mine's too small. So essentially, we check whether the function exists, because we need to check whether we're using the right version of Advanced Custom Fields, otherwise we're going to get an error basically that the function isn't there. And then we call the register block type function, which gets passed lots of arguments. So the name of the block is the sort of internal name in WordPress where it gets referenced. The title is the nice name that we see in the admin when we want to choose a block, testimonial. The description shows up in the sidebar on the right-hand side of the editor at the top underneath the name, so you can just describe what this block's going to be used for. Now the render callback, I'll come back to in a minute. The category is which category of blocks it fits into in the editor. So when you click on, if you've used a new editor, you click on the plus, I want to add a block, and then there's lots of categories that the blocks sit inside. So in this case, it's going to sit in the formatting category. Now you can actually create new categories in there. It's relatively straightforward, and you can do it with PHP as well, which is really good. I'll talk about that later on. The icon is a dash icon that you want to use to represent that block. Again, in the admin, each block shows a little icon that shows what the block's going to do. Also, with Advanced Custom Fields 5.8, it has support for using an SVG icon in there. So if you've got an SVG graphic in your theme or your plugin, you can reference it there, and it will use that little graphic as well. Keywords. So these are a list of words that if a user searches for your block, it will show in the search results. So for example, they might search for wanting to add a quote, but I'd quite like the testimonial block to display in the search results when they type quote. So I've added the word quote in the array to make sure that that actually works. I think you can add up to 3 words. I think that's what the core allows you to do. And then the last point on here is the post types, which indicates which post types this block is going to be available on. So I will pass an array. So in this instance, it'll show on pages and posts. If I have a custom post type, then this block won't be available in that custom post type. And you can pass in as many as you want in there. So let me come back to the render callback function. So this is the function that runs when your block is output on the front end of your website. So in here, you would do what you normally do in ACF. So you would do your get fields and your if have rows and so forth, and loop through the fields that you've got and check whether they're there and do all your markup. Nothing's changed almost. So even though this is now saving the data in a different way because it's in Gutenberg, it's not in metadata anymore, we still use the same functions in ACF that we'd used all the time. And that's the function that you'd use to output your block on the front end. In addition to that, it also has a render_template argument that you can pass into here. So instead of having a function in PHP that renders the front end, you could actually call a file instead and reference a file, maybe in your theme or maybe in a plugin that would then do the front end output as well. I'm not sure which one overrides the other, but I'm sure you could test that one. So we've used a callback, but you could easily use a template file in your theme or your plugin. There are lots and lots of other options that you can pass to this function. I haven't got time to go through them all, but there's things like enqueuing style sheets and JavaScript files if your block needs to do something with those two things. And there's lots of settings as to how the block behaves inside the Gutenberg editor in the block editor. So all of the ACF blocks have the option for a preview mode and then like an edit mode. The preview mode tries to show you sort of like what it looks like on the front end in the editor. And then the fields kind of jump onto the right-hand side into that sidebar and down the side. So that's another option. And then you can add support for the different alignment options that Gutenberg supports, full width, and so on. There's lots of arguments, so I'd go and have a look. The link at the top there is the page on the Advanced Custom Fields website that shows you all of the arguments you can pass to this. It's really quite flexible and really very good, so do have a look at that if you're interested in building blocks in this way. And then we just hook our function in that register block into the ACF init hook, which kind of like runs when ACF stuff loads up. And then what happens is once I've registered my block, I get this extra option on the bottom of the location. So remember, this is where we tell our Advanced Custom Fields that I want these fields to show in this location. Well, my block now becomes a location. It's a bad screenshot because really I should have put testimonial, but this is a people block. I mean, imagine I've registered a people block. And now I can say to ACF, I want these fields, these call to action fields, to show in the block called people. So when the block gets added, these fields will show in that particular block so you can see them. Now hopefully this is going to be a video that plays. There we go. So this is an example. This is straight off the Advanced Custom Fields blog, so it's not something I've done. But this is a little people block that's been created. That's Elliot, the developer. So this is what it kind of looks like in the admin when you've written a block yourself in Advanced Custom Fields. And all of the field types in Advanced Custom Fields are supported, so you can use all of the fields that you've ever used before, and so on. So here's the preview thing. So you can see the fields flip to the right-hand side, and then you get the preview in the left-hand side, the preview of the actual block in the left-hand side, and you can kind of see it changing live. I'm not so keen on that on the right because it's a bit compact and small, so maybe there's some improvements to be made there as well, but get the idea. There's the sort of alignment options. And then like any other block, you can drag it and drop it around, move its order, etc., and change its position. So that's how you register blocks, create blocks, etc. Now, at the back end of last year, I think it was, I spoke at WordCamp Manchester and at WordCamp Edinburgh about how we'd already used ACF to build our own block-based editor. Now, if you'd seen David's talk on the first morning, Atomic Smash, they've done very similar to we have. So we'd already used the Advanced Custom Fields flexible content module, which allows you to create flexible layouts to provide our clients with more of a block-based editor. And we had our own plugin that we built that kind of built on Advanced Custom Fields and provided a suite of blocks that our clients tended to need all the time. So we looked at all the designs we got from clients, and we looked at the different layouts that they had on all those designs, and we came up with a list of about 12 or 13 different blocks that we thought would be really good just to have in a bank of code that we could just call upon every time we needed them, rather than just keep rewriting the same stuff all the time, which we found we kept doing. So, with the release of the ACF version 5.8, it means that we can now port all that stuff across and actually use the native editor in WordPress, the block editor, rather than relying on getting rid of that old content box and putting the ACF flexible content into that page. And that's what we've been working on over the last few months, using the beta versions and testing it. And obviously now it's come live, we're almost ready to sort of get this out there onto client sites. So it's kind of the new and improved plugin that we used to use. But it's obviously using the native block editor. So what does it have in it? So these are the blocks that we have currently got, I think this is all of them, in our plugin. So when we obviously activate our plugin, we have access to using all of these block types straight away. They're all set up for us to use. So we've got a form block which is integrated with Gravity Forms, so it shows you a selection of the forms that you've got already created. Recent content shows you you can show the latest 5 posts or the latest 5 custom post types or the latest 5 posts from this category or something like that. Feature row, we've called it a feature row. It's probably a bad name, but it essentially means piece of media and then some text and a title and a button next to it. It's common sort of theme in designs these days, and you can flip it round so the image or the video's on the left or the right, etc. And we've got documents, we've got content, which is just obviously rich text content that you perhaps like a classic block type idea. We've got videos, we've got accordions, we've got like a pricing table type block, which allows us to create those sorts of layouts. Calls to actions, quotes, headings, stats, and so on, and then obviously an image and separators and things. Now, you might shout, well, some of those are actually already in Gutenberg, so why would we want to recreate them? Well, that's 2 reasons. One, we have some extra options on those blocks that we want to provide to users. So we want to have that as our own block. And obviously, with the native Gutenberg, you don't get the same sort of wrapper classes that have around those blocks that we might want to have on our block, so that all blocks have got the same markup so that we can then style them. There are functions in the block editor, or the world of blocks, shall we say, that do allow you to do things like that, change the markup of blocks. I think there's a filter called render block, which allows you to put stuff before and after a block. So you could use those sorts of things, but this is just the way that work for us. I'm not saying it's the right way. And we've used the native WordPress functions for add theme support to be able to decide which of these we'll actually allow a particular website to have access to. Because obviously not all websites are going to need them all, so why put them in the editor? You've then got to style them all, you've got to make sure that they all work. So in your theme, you can call add theme support, and then for HD blocks, and then you can pass an array of the block names that you want to support. If you don't pass any array, it just supports them all. So you can get them all in there. So it allows you to easily turn them off and turn them on a per site basis. But we're still using the same plugin, obviously. In the block editor, this is what this looks like when you click plus block or add a block. So we've created a new category just to keep them all separate so the user knows which is their collection of blocks. It's called HD blocks. And these are all the blocks in, and you can see the little icons from the dash icon library in WordPress. And all the user does is just click on the one they want, and it drops it in the editor, just like any other block, like you saw on the demo. So this was something that was important to us, was the output of all these blocks. So in our plugin, all of the output, or the markup for each block is done. So we don't need to actually do that on a per client basis. So in the plugin, every block has a template file that gets called by the render callback, the function that runs when you look at the block on the front end. It just calls a template file, and it calls that in an extensible way. So it'll check the child theme, it'll check the parent theme. If it's not there, it'll then fall back to the plugin. So all of that markup is done. I've written it all the time. I don't need to keep writing it for every client. So all of the, get me this field, if we've got a value in this field, then do this, and all that sort of stuff. That's just saving lots and lots of time. And it's really helpful because if that particular markup for this particular block doesn't work for the design that we've got for this client, then all we need to do is take a copy of that template, put it into the themes folder, and it will just get used instead. It will overwrite itself. So the idea was to make this as flexible as possible, so we could try kind of use the same plugin, but make it flexible that it would work for every client. And it's been really good. It's worked very well. We also have some default options on each block that you can add support for or change. So when each block's declared, we get this default field sort of part of an array that gets passed. And I'll show you this in a second with a screenshot, but each block can have some specific options. So for example, you can say that it has or it has not got an inner div. I'm not a front-end developer, but I'm told that's handy to have an extra div inside it for some reason. Each block can support a background color. It can support a background image. It can support a light text option. So for example, if a user sets a dark background color and the default text for a block is black, then they're not going to see any text. So we need to have some way of allowing the user to say, I need to support light text. So we give them a little checkbox. And then that outputs a class, which then the styles can use to say what happens when a block is light text. It might be that it's white, it might be that it's a different color, doesn't matter. And then each block can actually have templates. This is something we've been experimenting with recently. So we had a design that came to us that had lots of those feature row blocks that I mentioned. So the concept of some media on one side of the screen and buttons and text on the other screen. But when we looked at them, they were all kind of slightly different in the way they were laid out, and they'd need separate markup for every one of them. So instead of creating different blocks, so when you click the plus icon, you say, I want like feature row 1 or feature row 2 or feature row with this type of image. We just thought, let's create one block called feature row, and then when you get inside that block, you can then choose what template you want to use to display it. So this gives you a drop-down that says which template that you want to use. Now, it's not perfect because the name's template, so you don't get to see what it's going to look like, but it's a starting point from now, and I'm sure we'll improve on it. And then each block can support a block title and a block intro if you want it to, so that you can, again, keep some consistency with all blocks and have all block titles the same. In the editor, this is kind of what a block looks like. Don't know which block this is, paragraph, no it's not, can't remember. But all blocks have two tabs in our plugin. So they have a content tab, which is essentially where the person writes the stuff that's going to output on the page. And then they have an options tab, which is where they kind of set the options for that block. So you can see in the options tab, we've got where they can choose the background color and image. They can set the heading, the block heading level. So that block title, they can choose whether that's a H1, 2, 3, 4. It defaults to H2, but sometimes if you want to put a block, the first thing on a page, you probably want that to be a H1 because it's the first heading on a page. And that's site specific as to whether that's important to you or not, of course. So yeah, we split these into two things. The other really good thing about the plugin is it has lots of CSS helper classes, which again, I'm not a front end, I tend to don't touch any of it, but I'm told this is really good for our front-end developers to be able to target specific blocks that have specific characteristics. So these are some of the classes that get output on all of our blocks, depending on what those options that you've chosen in the back end. So if you have a background image on a block, then it would add a class to that called has-bg image, so that the front-end developer knows that that block has a background image, and they might want to style that slightly differently if they have that particular thing. Same with color, same with light text. It also outputs the template that you're using if it supports templates. So it would add a class of template -- and then the name of the template. It outputs whether it's got a block title and a block intro, whether that's present in the block. And it also outputs if it's a repeater block. So for example, if you've got an accordion and you've got like multiple accordion elements, it will output the number of those that are actually in that particular block, which I'm told is handy. So also it's very extensible, I'll come to that in a second, so you can add your own classes to these blocks with a little filter in WordPress that allows you to do that, again in PHP, which is nice. So what was important to us, I said this before, is that when we built this plugin, we wanted to try and use this on all our client sites. We wanted this common thing that we could use on all the sites, but we wanted to make it flexible so that obviously all client sites aren't the same, and we need to make it so that we can change things on a client-by-client basis, but still keep to that common code base that wasn't going to change too much. So the plugin, as I said, is built extensively. It's got lots of hooks and filters and things in to allow you to change various elements, and it allows you to obviously overwrite those templates so that you can make the markup suit the designs better if that's what's needed. So just an example of one of the extensible features, every time an image is called, we have a little filter where you can pass the image size. So if the image size, the default is like a medium image for a call to action, you might not want it like that, you can just override that with a filter quite quickly. And I think the last thing to sort of say is that, you know, it's very young, this plugin, both Advanced Custom Fields, the new version, and our plugin. It is constantly evolving. I've spoken to Elliot, the developer of ACF, and he's got lots of ideas on Advanced Custom Fields, lots of improvements to make on the block editing part of it, particularly around the styling. It doesn't quite look at the moment like a native Gutenberg block, and I'm sure that will come in eventually. So do watch out for ACF version 5.8. I'm sure it will improve massively over the course of the next few months as he gets time to add the features and things that he's looking to do. So that's blocks. As I said, or as Dave said, I'm Mark Wilkinson. I am the co-owner of High Rise Digital. I'm also a former teacher. These blackboards kind of interest me a little bit, but there's a story about one of these blackboards, if you ask me later, when I was teacher training. It was interesting. I'm a WordPress developer, so I tend to focus on the back-end side of WordPress. As I said, we're a small agency. There's only 3 of us. We've got 2 front-end people and 1 back-end. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I am WP Mark. I tweet about WordPress and web and back-end stuff. We are at High Rise Digital. That's our website if you want to read all about us. And I'd be happy to take any questions, although I might not necessarily have the answers, but I'll do my best. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Big round of applause for Mark. Who would like to ask the first question?
Thanks, Mark. Go back a few slides, the bit to tell you when to stop. Keep going. The bit where you set the options, is that part of your plugin or is that ACF just to clear things up? I'm not quite sure what.
Yeah, that's part of our plugin. So again, ACF has a tab field, so we've just utilised the tab field to split that into 2 bits, so that you can just separate it out for the user so they don't have to get the mix of things. I'd love to see the ability to put fields in the right-hand side of the editor. So I don't know if I can go all the way back to the start. Where's the editor gone? There. So I would love to put like options on the right-hand side. So when you click on a block in the editor, can you see it says document and block? When you click on a block, the block thing's highlights and you get the block settings. I'd love to be able to, and maybe you can, and I haven't found it yet, but I'd love advanced custom fields to allow me to put all those options in the right-hand side. That would be even better. And maybe that'll come. Maybe that'll come, as I said, it's evolving. So yeah.
How is the data stored for each block? Is it stored as an attribute on the block, or is it stored in post-meta?
It is not stored in post-meta, so I assume that it's stored in the same way that the native block stores its data. Yeah. You can set it, I think it's post-meta, just like in Gutenberg, I think, yeah. Oh, there you go.
It's stored in the actual post table as JSON encoded strings.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah. Which is good.
Make sure I check behind.
Thanks for the talk, Mark. Really interesting. At one point, you were talking about there's 2 different views for an ACF block, where you get what it looks like and then how you can edit it. Is there a way to set that at the default for that when somebody views a page?
There is, yes, I think there is. That's part of the register block type function. I think you can pass in there the arguments as to what you're allowed to do and what the default is. We've actually turned that off, so we don't allow them to preview it in the back end. We might turn it on for certain clients, I'm not so sure. But we kind of take the idea of like you're editing, not viewing, and then you edit it here and view it on the front end. But yeah, I think you can pass that in as well, yeah.
Cool, thanks. Yeah.
Anyone else?
Cool.
So ACF, when it was sort of first launched, sort of took away the for the majority of us as the native WordPress ability to create post-meta. Do you see this now as the way forward in that the majority of developers are going to sort of use this rather than having to go down the route of learning React and learning sort of to do it within core?
I can't answer for every developer, but it's a lot easier than doing it the other way, yes. So I can't see why. Well, as a developer who is building sites for clients in an agency, I just can't learn all that stuff that I need to learn to be able to do this with React and with JavaScript. I don't have the time. I'd have to hire someone in who knows how to do it. So for me, it just solves a problem. And I think, you know, as long as it works for our clients, which appears to be great, then I can't see why I'd want to change that at the moment. And there is the argument, well, I'm relying on advanced custom fields, but I think a lot of us are doing that anyway. So. And that, it's a good plugin, it's a great, well supported, so yeah, give it a go.
Anyone else? Check.
You want the back of
Okay.
it?
Oh, yeah. Good stuff. Just keeping. Oh.
Hiya, sorry, another question. You're talking about creating blocks in your plugin that sort of replicates some stuff that Gutenberg does already, but you're adding more options. If you're doing that, are you turning off any core blocks? How are you doing that? Or are you just keeping them the same? Or is that on a client basis, basically?
So the first iteration was, yes, we got rid of all the core blocks. But you can't do that, really, because if you've got an existing website and you're integrating stuff into an existing website, then as soon as I activate my plugin, all the core blocks will be turned off, and any content they've already created will just be like, ugh, don't know how to render it. So we can't do that. I think if we'll take it on a case-by-case basis. So if we're building a site from scratch, it might be that we want to stop some of the core blocks being used. But I think for default, no, we won't be turning off the core blocks. But there, as I said, there are filters that you can use to modify the block markup and wrap core blocks in things if that's necessary for you from a front-end perspective. So there is those options as well. But all of the blocks that are available in WordPress you can do all that in PHP. You can like turn them on and off in PHP. You don't need to do that all in JavaScript, which is quite good. So you've got the option of either or, basically, whatever's suitable. But I think we took the option to start with, let's just turn off all the core blocks. We don't want to use it. Well, you want to use our blocks. But then we thought, well, actually, that's just not going to work on sites where you've already got content, essentially. So yeah.
Cool, thank you.
I use CMB2 at the moment, but thinking of switching to ACF. I use CMB2 because you do everything programmatically rather than through a GUI. Can you do the same with ACF with this so that everything is... I just find it makes it easier for version control and moving between different staging and live environments and so on.
Yeah, so all the fields that you saw of all those blocks, they're all built with PHP. There's nothing happening in the Advanced Custom Fields GUI. So it's all just... essentially, all of the blocks that I've built are just in a big array, in a big PHP array. So you can filter that array and you can include fields, take fields out and things. So yeah, so nothing's done in the GUI in this instance. So in that instance, it's pretty much the same thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Cheers.
Thank you. So, do you still want to ask? Not a question, it's more of a comment. With Gutenberg, you have two kinds of blocks. You have blocks that just are JavaScript based that insert HTML into the editor, and you have server-side rendered blocks.
Yep.
I like that all of your blocks are server-side rendered because for client work, if, let's say, for example, the testimonial changes, you can change your render callback.
Yep.
It's one of my biggest issues with... It basically makes blocks act very similar to shortcodes in that you can change the output of them. If I have any recommendations, like make sure that all your blocks are server-side rendered because you never know when a client wants to change their testimonial to something else. And these frameworks are going to allow us to get back to where we were with shortcodes in a more visual way.
That was a big thing for me as well. I asked a question on the GitHub repo for Gutenberg, like what's the solution for in a like if we use a normal block, what's the solution for updating all the instances of that block across the website? And there wasn't really an answer. User dynamic block was suggested, but then it was not seen as the best option for some reason, but I don't know why. But yeah, with these blocks, like you said, if the markup needs to change for a block, you just change that one template file, and that will get reflected across all where those blocks are used on across all the site, not just the one block on the page where you might have edited it, which is a big thing. So it's a good point. Yeah.
From our experience so far with using ACF blocks, the post-edit screen still feels quite classic editor because that's the way it renders. Have you found any way or efficient way of adding styles to that screen so it feels more like a Gutenberg page?
We haven't looked into it, this is the honest answer. We did some styling for our old plugin, which was using the flexible content to make that a bit better. So I don't see why you couldn't do that, but I really do think that ACF will fix that problem. I really do think that in the coming months they're going to make that more a better experience in terms of the way it looks and the way it feels. Because like you said, it does look a bit just dumped in there at the moment, but I'm sure that'll improve. But I'm sure you could style that yourself if you wanted to. But maybe just hold back a bit and see if it arrives in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, it's something we've discussed, but it just feels inefficient doing 2 style sheets
Yeah.
for the same website.
Yeah. So hopefully it'll come along and be fixed. Or improved, maybe we should say.
You mentioned the fact that the data is stored within the page content. Is there a way of simultaneously storing it as metadata so that if you're doing something headless, you can still get it out as metadata as you can at the moment?
I don't know with advanced custom fields, but I know you can with a Gutenberg block. You can say this is a save the data of the block in post meta. So I assume you probably can. And again, I say if you can't, you probably will be able to eventually. So I don't know the answer, sorry, yeah, we've not looked at it.
Anybody else?
Hello, is this just available in the Pro version of ACF?
I believe it's both. Yeah, I believe it's both. But obviously, with the free version, you just wouldn't have access to the Pro fields, if that makes sense. I believe the repeater and the gallery field and that sort of thing are the Pro ones. So I think it works. I might be wrong, but I think it works with the free version. But you would only have access to the same field sets that you do in the free version.
Thank you. I think we have time for another couple. If anybody has another question.
Go on. This isn't really a question as such, but just to go back to that question about the CSS stuff you're asking, I know that there's a talk by someone called Sammy at 10up who's done some Gutenberg styling stuff, and he's done a talk at London as a lightning talk, and I think he'll be talking at WordCamp Europe. So those are both talks worth checking out for potential solutions for that. Just
cool. Check the live stream if you're not going. Yeah.
Okay, is it anyone else or anyone have a comment? No. I think all we need to do now is put our hands together and give Mark a very big thank you. Thank you very much, Mark.